This is BofC Live, the video and podcast series of Business of Cannabis. Find out all that we do at businessofcannabis.com. Coming up, a BofC Live conversation with Matt Carnes, the founder of Greenwave Advisors, a cannabis-centric advisory firm. The firm's services offerings include independent research and analysis, due diligence, license valuations and applications, and other advisory services. He served as an equity analyst on both the sell side and buy side, and Greenwave Advisors is based in New York City, which is why we want to connect with him in December about what's happening in New York. Matt, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Nice to see you face to face. We've done this once, but not recorded face to face. We recorded once via Zoom over the summer. New York is on the cusp.
It is. It is.
But
legally, I should say.
I was going to say, this is what I was going to say. It's on the cusp legally. There is a medical market here now, but I just walked by a store that said cannabis, New York's first recreational cannabis club. That
There
sounds
you have
shady.
it. Yeah, there's a lot of that. I mean, the day after they legalized, I saw a sign in my neighborhood, dispensary. I took a picture of it. I posted it. It's down. I hope, law enforcement, whoever saw it and, is now more aware of what's going on. But I think you're going to see that all over the place.
Yeah.
And, people who don't know any better, who haven't been following the industry, think, oh, it's legal. I read in the paper it's legal. So here you go.
Yeah. And then Albany is relatively slow.
Yes, for sure. We know that, for sure.
That predates cannabis by a lot.
Yes.
But it is slow on big decisions, and always has been, from what I've seen.
And more so during the Cuomo administration. Yeah. And then just to get medical marijuana on the books was a real battle.
Yeah.
And the evolution around that and how slow New York has been to ramp up. And they still really haven't ramped up.
Right, but it's also interesting. Like, you could be slow as a legislator, as a regulator, all those things, implementing the voters' will, whatever it is. Doesn't mean the doesn't mean people aren't getting cannabis.
Correct.
Like, you could be as slow as you want. You could take 5 years. In that 5 years, there's going to be billions of dollars of cannabis bought and sold and consumed, just not under your thumb, necessarily, right?
Absolutely.
So it's like you can go slow and get it perfect to your mind as a regulator, but consumers don't care.
They don't care, and the slower you go, the longer it is till you realize the revenues.
Right.
So it's.
And the longer you realize that it's going to take you longer than you think it is to, however you think you're going to either stamp out the legacy market. Like, it takes time, right? You might as well start because it's going to take a long time.
Absolutely. And I would say one of the disadvantages for New York, notwithstanding the fact that it took a very long time even for Cuomo to come on board for many years. No way. But then, he saw other states implementing medical marijuana. The sky hasn't fallen. Then some states were implementing recreational, most notable California. Finally, it was back in 2016. I believe the first, medical licenses were awarded and the market was implemented. But if you think about it, how slow let me back up a second. At that point in time, the form factors were very limited.
Right.
Medical marijuana, capsule, no edibles, no flower, very, very restrictive. So who the hell, especially in New York City,
Right.
is going to buy any of this stuff when anybody could get cannabis delivered probably quicker than a pizza these days.
We could probably do it while we're recording.
Oh, yeah.
Don't you think? Like,
probably.
Yeah,
We should.
Yeah, we
There
should
you
try.
go. Well,
It's already on order, so it should be up any moment.
Absolutely. And so, it was very interesting because when the existing license holders were looking for capital, people were thinking, well, gee, why would I invest? There's not going to be any activity. There's no way these businesses are going to compete with an illicit market. And that's very much the case. It's a call option. They are going to see their day in the sun when the rec market is implemented because they're grandfathered with a fully integrated license.
Right.
So that's the reason behind. So all these investors are now gonna, now they're gonna be satisfied, hopefully.
Right.
But if you think about it, when I launched Greenwave Advisors in 2014, and I assessed each market, and I looked at medical marijuana in each market, really the addressable market is defined by how many people have each qualifying condition.
Right.
How many people have cancer, how many people have glaucoma. So it was a very, very daunting task, but that's what I did. Right. That's how I approached it. And so guess how many people, when I looked at the New York market, Roughly, now there's about 20 million people in New York. About 1.8 would fall under my definition of an addressable market.
Have one of the indications.
Yes, so who has glaucoma? Because there are statistics out there of how many people have these. And then I made a broad assumption around, how many chronic pain, the catch-all, right? So today, and now this market's been implemented for 5-6 years now, 150,000 patients. Then the medical community, they made it very restrictive around the medical community. For, you had a doctor had to go take a course. Like, that's going to happen, right? So they
skeptical doctors taking a course. They
yeah.
don't want to take.
So
entrepreneurial ones maybe, but not necessarily.
Exactly. So so now this market has really never flourished, and they never really had anything implemented really on a large scale to accommodate a rec market. So now what are they doing? Now, all of a sudden, flower is allowed. Now, all of a sudden, you don't need to pay for a medical card. Now, all of a sudden, all these things are starting to open. Oh, we'll now give our patients, allow our patients access to flower, whatever.
But not pre-rolls.
Yeah.
Right?
No edibles.
Right.
But that will probably change. So they're teeing up for the rec market, clearly. Now, the problem in the Northeast, well, more so in New York, is they're not really able to flick the switch like they did in, like, say, for example, Arizona.
Right.
Arizona had a very, robust medical market.
Like Michigan, too.
Yes, exactly. So when the time comes, just flick the switch, get your application.
This is going from 150,000 to several million people that want weed.
Yes, exactly. So New York is kind of stretched now. They're at a disadvantage because they weren't forward thinking back in the day. Right. New Jersey, somewhat more forward thinking when Chris Christie was the bottleneck. So when he left office and Murphy stepped in, the first thing he did, let's expand the medical program.
Right. They had indications in 2018.
Yeah. So
with the pen.
Exactly. So that's what happened. So now they're better positioned. I mean, there was a bottleneck in awarding the new licenses because of some legal issue, but they're in better position now. And now when recreational comes online, there's going to be a huge undersupply because now you have all these people that want to smoke weed legally that can't, there's only a limited amount of product available. So now we have, some of the larger MSOs obviously are, tuned into that and are building out and so forth.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting because as you stated, like state by state, of course, but even going back to like the number of indications and the willingness of doctors really is an indicator of how successful the market be early on.
Exactly.
It's really interesting to sort of think about that. And you can think about it in Michigan, you can think about it in Arizona, you think about it in New Jersey and New York, you can think about it as a country of Canada. Like all those things factor into the early days success or failure, but also what is factored in is, and this, I'm interested in your thoughts, you end up, then people make major investments to like ramp up production very quickly because it's unclear who else is ramping up for production. And then you have this oversupply, but it takes time, and that's just as devastating to these companies.
And there's still a lot of unknowns, like interstate commerce and how that's all going to play out. So do you build a big facility in New York, but New York may be able to accommodate New Jersey, and then then we're going to have this cooperative agreement among the tri-state area.
Right.
But then guess what? Then you have issues around lab testing and testing requirements, and is everybody on board? Is everybody in sync?
Right.
How is that going to then change when it's a national, footprint?
And why would you build it in New Jersey, for example, which is very expensive?
There's so many uncertainties. So this is why, hats off to the larger MSOs who are able to figure this out and balance and walk on that fine line, because there's a lot of decisions to have to be,
And there are hundreds of millions of dollars of decisions.
Yes, absolutely. And there's still some element of uncertainty.
Yes,
for sure.
Lots of it. And part of that is uncertainty because DC is dysfunctional maybe. And they can't make a decision on banking. They can't make a decision on anything.
They can't. And that's really, really, really just mind-boggling. I mean, just for no other reason. We already know, right? The smoke's out of the bomb, okay? Right. Pot is going to be federally illegal. We don't know the timing, the nature, extent, and timing, and all that, but it's going to happen. But meanwhile, because of banking and the restrictions around that, it's a public safety issue right now, and we're seeing this more and more. People are getting held up, especially post-COVID.
Yes. Yeah.
Especially because cash is cash. People are more desperate, and so. What's an easy target? Gee, let me look online here. This dispensary is open from 9 to 5, and it's over here.
And we hear the people coming and going.
Yes, and they probably, surveillance around that, I'm sure. So it's really is very nonsensical. And recently, there was big hope that the SAFE Act would be passed. It would be to be included in the defense spending bill, and that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So
no kidding.
Yes. So now,
can I ask you a question about that?
Uh-huh.
I think banking, of course, is an important. That's what they were talking about. But does the delay in DC just strengthen the position of these MSOs because they're operating and they're generating revenue and they're cementing their footprint in these states?
Absolutely.
And more?
Yeah. At some point though, the floodgate has to open, and they're well positioned. I mean, it's almost it's advantageous for a little bit more of a stall, but the banking issue, just for nothing else, just let people these operators put money in a friggin' bank account, a normal bank account.
Right.
That's all right now. That's I'd be happy about that.
So would they.
So yeah. Because if you think about it, there's such an added cost of prohibition. There's the extra taxes that are involved. There are these compliance costs, all these risks that have to be thought of and mitigated, and all kinds of other costs associated. So what's really remarkable about these larger MSOs is that they are able to achieve a free cash flow profile in light of all these added costs.
Right.
So and they're, obviously these stocks are trading at a discount to really any normal company, really in light of, their growth rates.
And opportunity.
And opportunity. Part of that is the risk that's still embedded in the industry.
Right.
There are operational risks. Yes, there's operational risks because people are getting held up.
Right. Right, but that's
that's a piece of it.
Those are super important to think about and do, but those are also not micro issues, but not one-offs, but like point of sale basically, as opposed to sort of broad swaths. And so when you look ahead, because we're in New York, it's interesting to talk about New York, and it will become legal at some point. I mean, it's legal, but it's it will be an industry at some point, and what it'll look like, and how important do you think that is to the overall? So New York's influence. It's 20 million people. That's not none. That's a big market. But I think it is more important than just those 20 million people being served with cannabis. Culturally, business-wise, policy-wise, like regionally, like how are you looking at that and sort of assessing sort of the importance of that market, big picture?
It was two markets, right? First it was California.
Yeah.
That was a big thing on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And that kind of laid the groundwork for other states to legalize. And now we have New York. And clearly, as you say, it's a huge opportunity. It can't be ignored. And clearly, and this was very, very predictable. I mean, this is not like, oh, gee, this is such a revelation.
Right.
When New Jersey passed rec, of course New York is going to do it. All you have to do is get on a PATH train and swing over there. Right. Which I think is going to, because I think New Jersey is going to ramp sooner than later, relative to New York, people are going to do that.
Be a good location to get right out the path.
Oh yeah, completely. It's not really that difficult. But New York is very important. Also, just besides Wall Street and the capital, right? Because now I have a Wall Street background. I worked on the sell side. I worked for a few of the brokerage houses, Bear Stearns, Cowen, and so forth. And and I'm my clientele are institutional investors. And when I started this, people really in 2014. They really kind of shied away from me, to be honest with you. And I'd like to think it was because of the pot, not because of me.
We'll talk to you in 5 years. Yeah. Right?
I'd like to think it was because of that, not for any other reason. This is where a lot of capital is. So now when people see New York and they see, not that a lot of people haven't traveled at this point to California or whatever, but there's still a handful that haven't really experienced what a dispensary is like, how professional it's gotten, the caliber, the nature, everything is just really top notch now, and it's probably going to get even better, obviously. Yeah. So to have the Wall Street crowd and the money centers in New York see it, and not only that, on Madison Avenue too. Yeah. Now you have really advertisers and all that kind of stuff.
And thinking about even increasingly, I was just seeing pictures people were posting from California, and not that he's not great, but like Gary Payton, which is great, but there are more and more sports people getting involved post career, getting involved in cannabis. Art, Drake, the arts, culture, sports, society people, like they are getting more involved, and I think it drives down some of that stigma. But I think nothing replaces is seeing it day to day on a street corner.
Absolutely.
And like both seeing that it's not a big deal and seeing that it's amazing. Like,
and the packaging and just the thought behind it. I mean, there's a lot of intellect behind it, rather than just buying a bag of weed,
Right.
in a plastic bag.
Yeah.
You know?
That was pretty good too. But yeah.
So, I think that's, all those factors and the job creation and everything else, I think, that really will lead to a heightened level of interest, not only in the Northeast, but certainly, hopefully, within Washington, they'll accelerate the process. Now, Chuck Schumer obviously has a political agenda, to put what he did, put everything into one bill. Just a lot of extra burden and a lot of things that probably weren't necessary. Now, to me, most notable, just because I'm a numbers guy, is the excise tax, which would go up to 25%. Now, if you think about that, 25%, in addition to all the other taxes, like, you think the illicit market is going to go away?
This is exactly the thing that came up in a conversation earlier today that we're recording is you can have policy goals, great lofty policy goals, keep out of the hands of kids, heavily regulated, make sure the product is safe, and all those things. It's great. But if you and generate tax revenue. But if you do all those things and make them perfect as a regulator that you think is perfect, that's not necessarily how the market is going to react. People going to react. Like if it's 25% more expensive to buy from you, Matt, versus you, guy on the street, then, and I know the guy on the street, and I've been buying from him for 10 years.
And you know the product.
Right. It becomes, you need to I don't know what the right word is. Lose some as a regulator. Like you got to be able to not take all the wins, right? Because you have a policy goal of creating a market and driving out the legacy market. Like there has to be some balance in that.
Yeah, and you have to think bigger picture. Some of the things, yes, you want to put everything there, but let's take a step back and look at other compensating controls. Let's look at our compensating factors. For example, social equity, very, very important. Nancy Mace from South Carolina, the Republican who drafted a bill, very sensible piece of legislation. She's saying let's let the states kind of work on that. And I think that makes a lot of sense because look at New York, for example. 50% of the applicants, there's a mandate to award 50% of the applicants to minorities, people that were underserved by the war on drugs. There's that. There's also bigger picture, just on a national level, ESG investing, right? So social responsibility is a component of that. And so if you look at that as on a big picture, on a national footprint, that kind of takes care of that a little bit too.
Yeah.
So you have both of these issues being, both this issue being addressed in multiple areas. Yeah. So why does there have to be a bottleneck at the federal level for this?
Oh, Matt.
I know. Oh, gee. Why? Oh, gee.
No, but it is.
But it just doesn't make sense.
I also think there's this thought that we're going to do this and we do it right. We're going to do it, and then everybody will pull all these people from the legacy market into the legal market. It's fairly resistant, right? I mean, initially, right? These businesses now that are operating unregulated in the legacy market have supply. They have supply chain, they have customers, they have a well-oiled machine, and every day it gets more well-oiled because they see what's coming, right? They are dialed in. The consumers it's a difficult thing to move, but if you're not trying to address it, it's getting more entrenched. Right? Yep. And that's the thing. And then the pathways for the people in legacy market to enter is partly what New York wants to do, but there's still big thorny questions to actually answer. What are those people supposed to do with their money?
Hello. One problem with that. Then there's the whole issue of, the stocks and how they're traded and what exchanges they're listed on. Right. Access to capital. The cost of capital is obviously higher in this industry than any other industry because of all the, restrictions around banking. And then, one other thing too, that I was thinking about is in terms of the Schumer bill versus the Mace bill, so Mace is looking at a 3.5% or I think 3.75% excise tax. Compare that to 25%. I think what's more reasonable, now I also take a look back and look at the federal budget. Now that's totally out of hand. Right. It's trillions of dollars deficit. Right. But when you're in a deficit, every dollar should help, right? So you want to replace the 280E tax And so what I've done is I've gone through the exercise of looking at the publicly traded MSOs and looking at how much they paid in 280E tax as a percentage of the sales. It's obviously not a perfect exercise, but it gives me some indication. And there was consistency in the amount.
Okay.
And it's shaking out more like around 10%. So I think you really, you don't want to, I don't know necessarily if everything has to be in sync, where, okay, tomorrow, no more 280E tax.
We're going to replace it with this.
Yes, but at some point, you would think whoever's looking at the budget at a national level, okay, we're going to lose 280E, let's replace it. But we can't be too crazy, because then we're going to lose it to the illicit market.
Right.
So the balance, you hear it from Greenwave here, I would say maybe 10 to 15% is where it will shake out.
Okay. You before we came on, you were talking about your next couple of weeks. You're going to our cannabis conference in San Francisco.
Yes.
In January, you'll be in Palm Beach.
Palm Beach, yep.
Palm Beach, I want to say. As you're sort of doing this and talking to the industry sort of countrywide or nationwide, are you seeing, is there, I was reading into it, there is some consternation about what's happening in DC, certainly. Mm-hmm. But is there still this sort of hopeful feeling that we are on the trajectory to a rapid, when people are looking ahead, are they projecting 3, 5, 10 years to national scale of an industry, or is it just too difficult to tell?
Well, I think the industry is going to continue to morph, right? So the first stop on the bus, get the states in order. Yeah. Each state's going to legalize. Each state's going to do their thing. It's still fragmented. It's still, every state operates in a closed economy. Now we have everything sort of, okay, well now we're making progress at the federal level. When is that? Now what is that going to look like? There are still risks, right? We don't know how the industry is technically going to be regulated, and I think that might be one of the rationale behind the delay in getting the party started, because I think the lawmakers really want to better understand the industry. What is the FDA going to do? What is behind everything? And so this gives them some time to kind of figure that all out. It was only since Biden took office that they really started to get their hands around this. They kind of knew, and I think it's really pretty much predetermined that it is going to be legal.
Right. It's just a matter of.
It's just a matter who's going to get credit for it. Right. Who's going to get credit, and when and all that. There's all politics. Yeah. So once that's all figured out, and we have this legalized at a federal level, a high look similar to alcohol in the sense that you don't, just because it's legal federally doesn't mean you have to. It's going to be shoved down every state's throat. Look at Utah and look at alcohol. New Hampshire. Yeah. So that's how that's going to look at. But then the bigger question is what are these publicly traded companies going to look like, right? So every day, almost every week, there's more and more consolidation. just everything's getting eaten up, and now the bigger players are getting better, faster, stronger, whatever.
They're learning everything.
Yeah. So they're and they have capital, and they're very strong, and they have the influence. And so at one point, but at the same time, big alcohol, big pharma, the big guys, they've always been looking at this industry.
Right. But they have more money and more
and more. So, then the question becomes longer term, what happens? Say 10, 15 years, is a cannabis company part of a big alcohol company? Are these cannabis companies, are they standalone?
Right. Even this week we saw Tilray just loves buying breweries.
Yes.
Right. They bought another one in Denver, and I think in the cannabis Twitter, I don't even mean the cannabis industry, but people on Twitter are this, alcohol and cannabis should be separate. But big companies own lots of different assets that are complementary. And I think we'll see it go both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, then the other thing is, and this is one thing I talked about in 2014, is that how the industry will evolve. And there are different paths that these companies will go down. There's the rec path, there's health and wellness, so you'll see products at CVS or wherever. And then really true grade medical marijuana, pure, that has precise dosage, precise efficacy. Yeah. It will be medical marijuana as it exists today will be recalibrated and redefined.
To be covered by insurance.
Exactly. And it's going to be more science involved. The notion, listen, I think medical marijuana serves a purpose. Yeah. It helps people. But, when my mother was very sick with cancer and lung cancer and she couldn't really breathe, I gave her shots of whiskey. It wasn't medical whiskey.
It was wellness whiskey.
It was wellness. Right? So, that's medical is just, it's definitely needed, but I think it's just going to be redefined,
Yeah.
recalibrated.
Well, Matt, it's always good to talk to you because you have great perspective and you both see the micro because you're in New York, but also you see a macro, which is really important because I think we often, like tonight we're having an event in New York, like talking about what's happening in New York, super important, super critical for all the reasons we talked about, but it is also the piece of a puzzle that is big and growing and complex and has federal implications, business implications, Wall Street, like all those things are really compelling and you're thinking about it from all those angles, which I like to talk about. So thank you for stopping by today. Nice to see you in person.
Likewise.
And we will connect with you down the road, maybe after you do your sort of countrywide road trip.
Yes, for sure. And I look forward to your event this evening.
Me too.
The Business of Cannabis.
Just makes me nervous, but like, gathering people, not because of COVID, but because there's lots of logistics and those always happen.
I thought you thought
you know what helps
people
with
are
that?
crazy in New York. You don't want to be too close.
You know what helps with that? Cannabis, actually.
Absolutely. The cure for all.
It helps everything. So thanks for stopping by, Matt.
All right. Thanks. Have a good day.
You too. That was Matt Carnes of Greenwave Advisors. If you like this program, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you heard the show. It helps support the work we do. We're able to do what we do because of ongoing partnerships with Alterna Savings, Cannabis at Work, Cannabis Benchmark, Can Delta, Gallagher, Headset, and Torque & Main. Find out all that we do at businessofcannabis.com.